name is David Hoff, and I'm here to help you learn a little bit more about Mako's fundamentals, which is an underglaze. Originally, underglazes were designed for greenware, and they were clay-based and not frit-based. So I'll try to explain the difference between a fundamental and a stroke and coat as we go. Okay, so I'm going to switch my camera view for all of you so you can see what, you don't need to see my pretty little face here. And we're going to go right up here. Okay, now I've already applied I put my pattern on with clay carbon and or NCR paper. And the reason I like NCR paper or clay carbon or whatever you want to call it is that it leaves no dirt. In other words, if you use a regular carbon paper, like the old typewriter carbon, it'll leave a little bit of residue. If you do it with heavy pencil, it'll also leave some residue. And if you're going to use the tissue paper method of transferring, which works, try to find a water-based type Sharpie. But the NCR paper works really good. And if you can't find any NCR paper like clay carbon, don't go into the Office Depot and say, I need some clay carbon, because they'll look at you rather strangely. But you could buy a triplicate purchase order book and pull off the top copy and the middle copy, and that's clay carbon. That will work as clay carbon. So if you can't get a hold of it, you can take a purchase order book and tear it, or if you do cash receipts sometimes and it, carbonless, that's what it is. Okay, so I've got my pattern on. What I did is I put my pattern on with the NCR paper clay carbon, and then I came back and I lightly sponged the wear, just gently. It doesn't hurt the pattern, it comes back. And the reason I slightly sponge the wear is to remove any dust that might be on the surface of the wear. And it also conditions the piece for taking the color. So there's a capillary action going on, okay? So we're going to start with a base coat on the leaves, and we're going to bounce around. And I want to tell you guys right now, on my pattern, I numbered the lemons wrong. So the bottom lemon, let me use this because you can see it better. Okay, the bottom lemon, mark that number 1 instead of what I had. And then the upper lemon, mark number 2. And the middle lemon here, mark number 3. I don't know why I did it wrong, or anyway. So just so you know, it just makes it a little easier for you. So I'm going to take a round brush. I'm going to wet the round brush, and I'm going to go into the apple green. And I'm as smoothly as I can, I'm going to apply 1 coat of apple green to all of my leaves. So you just start at the base of the leaf, pressing hard, and as you get to the bottom of the leaf, lift up. Okay, now just pull it in and end on the point. So and then if you've got ridges, come back without an additional color and just smooth it out. And the reason you want to smooth it out is that since this is not a frit-based product, it will have a tendency to keep your ridges. And we're going to want that when we do the lemons, because we're going to get some texture with the lemons. Okay, so I'm just blocking it in. And when I paint leaves from base of the leaf to the tip. That's almost a standard for me, base to tip, and lots of pressure, and then lift up on the brush. So you're not plopping the color on, you're brushing it out 1 thin coat. Now the leaves support the design. Okay. Now notice how smooth the fundamental goes on. And when you get it out of the jar, sometimes you might have to add a drop of water to it, especially if it's been on the shelf for a little while. And I will tell you this, that the brown families have a tendency to thicken in the jar. There's nothing wrong. It's just the chemicals that are in the paint. And almost all browns, no matter what kind of color, have a tendency to thicken, whether it's stroke and coat, fundamentals, even glazes. Okay, bring this out around. Now remember, the pattern is only a guide. If you go outside the line, fine. One more leaf. Okay. And up. Okay, so you press it down, lift it up, smooth it out. You can see, you'll still see brush marks, because that's normally for opaque coverage with the fundamentals, you need 3 coats. That will give you opaque coverage. Now we're going to do a lot of blending and shading. Now I want some drying time. Okay, and very often when I write my techniques, you have all the information and you can do it, but I oftentimes don't teach exactly how it's written. So I'm going to move from the leaf for drying time, and I'm going to put 1 coat, smooth coat of bright yellow to lemons 1 and 2. Now just cut right in next to the painted green leaf. Again, put pressure on the brush. Notice I turn my plate. Sometimes it's a little easier for me, and I'm working towards myself because my muscles are relaxing. And when your muscles are relaxing, you have a little bit more control. I'm using like a 6 round. I'm using these straight from the jar. I did have to thin down my browns that are out here, but I'm using these straight from the jar. If they go on globby, then yeah, you would just add a drop of water. And now that Mako is manufacturing some Duncan products, Mako kept thin and shade in the product line, so you could add a little thin and shade, but water is readily available. Okay, I get the little nib in here. So I put these on so my lemons could dry and my leaves could dry, because I'm going to do some blending and shading. Okay. All right. I'm rinsing my brush, and I'm pinching after I rinse my brush. Okay, my water's up here. I rinse my brush, and then I take a paper towel and I press the water out. Okay. Okay, now we're going to go back to the leaves, and I gave you in your patterns, and this is something I like to do. I gave you this sheet, and the crisscrossy lines are where things are the darkest. Okay, and so I want to have some shading. Okay, you can see where I have darker shading. All right, So just keep in mind with this, you're not going to do little crisscrossy lines. You're going to shade, and those are darker areas. Okay. Now, so we're going to let's start with this upper leaf. Okay. And I want one side of the leaf to be a little bit lighter than the other side. And we're going to have shading, and you can see the different shades. Okay, so to get that, we're going to double load. Okay, now double load is really easy. I want to make a lighter side here, okay, on this one, because it's on top right here. Okay, so I'm going to go into my apple green, and I'm going to pull the side of my brush through the bright yellow. And I'm going to press the bright yellow to the outer edge of that leaf. Now, I don't know if you can really see it, but there's a little bit of yellow now on this edge. And I press the brush halfway across and lift it up. Okay. Now, I'm not a big fan of turning around and washing my brush every whip stitch. So I'm going to go back to my apple green. There's still some yellow in the brush, but that's okay. I'm going to pull through up here at the leaf green, which is a little tiny bit darker. And I'm going to come down the other side of the leaf. So I'm going to start at the base of the leaf, pressing hard, and I'm going to pull down and lift up. And then I'm going to work the brush across. That could be a little tiny bit darker towards the middle. And get your little tip in there by little tiny strokes. All right, then we're going to process all of the leaves similar. So let's keep I'm going to keep the light color to this on this one. It doesn't matter. I'm not using a color source. I mean a light source. I'm just using two-tone leaves. So I'm going to go now back to I didn't wash it, and go back to my apple corner load. And now I'm going to do one side of all of my leaves with the yellow to the outside edge. Now this is giving me a second coat. Okay. I'm going to work all the way down, and you're going to press it down and lift it up and bring it halfway across the leaf. Now, brush stroke is a combination of pressure, color, and motion. The pressure that you put on the brush, that's going to make it come wide or thin as you change your pressure. Motion is how you pull the stroke towards yourself, and the color is the color that you use. Cut it in and pull it down halfway across. Now this one, I'm going to put, this side is going to be my lighter side because it's rounded out. Now notice I didn't have to reload it. This brush, your brush is going to hold a lot of color. Now, if your brush grabs and doesn't flow, you don't have enough color on your brush. You got to make sure it just flows right off. Okay. Like that. Now, let's go and start to darken them. So they've had some time to dry. These lemons are drying, so that's going to be good for applying more color. If you do wet on wet, very often you'll lift off what you've already applied. So that's why we're just a little bit of a drying time. Side load with leaf green, loaded with the apple, side load with the leaf. Turn the brush of the dark colors to the outer edge. Starting at the top, you're going to press firmly down and bring the color across. Turning the brush. And pull it down. Now, you know you've got it pretty, if you don't want to have a sharp line. So you just kind of brush it out so it fades light into dark or goes dark into light. There. Okay. Cut it up. Now tuck it in underneath the lemon and then come down. Decided to wash it because the brush was getting overly full of color. Then I don't have the control. Tuck it in and down. One more. So we're gonna let this set a minute. Okay. Now, I want to increase the shading on these leaves that are under a lemon. And up here at the top, where this leaf here is on top of this leaf. The lemons are basically casting a shadow. Okay. So what I've done, and it's on your palette, up at the top, it says take forest green and leaf green. So forest green is really dark, so I take a little bit of forest green, add it, and a little bit of leaf green, add it, and mix the two together. So fundamentals can be mixed together to form other shades. Now, I don't want you to think that you can pick up a jar of stroke and coat and mix it with fundamentals. There are different formulations where stroke and coat has frit. This does not have frit. Okay, so this is going to fire flat and it needs to have a clear glaze of some kind to make it food safe and waterproof. Okay. Just keep that in mind because now I don't have to glaze it, but then there's a tendency for the bisque to get dirty and stuff like that. So in my mind's eye, when I'm using a fundamental, I like to see glaze on it. Okay. Now, we're going to go. We can use the same brush. Now we're going to talk about floating. So I've rinsed my brush, and I lay out a paper towel. Lay out a little paper towel. And you can see, and I'm going to go take the brush, pat it to a point, and I'm going to just let the brush lay on the paper towel and just soak up just a little bit of water. Don't press it in. Just let the capillary action work and let a little bit of the water leave the brush onto the paper towel. Okay. So I'm going to shade I'm going to shade this one right here. So what I'm going to do, I got my brush. I'm going to pull it. It's got water in it, and I'm going to pull it through this mix on one side. So pulling it through the mix, and if you want to practice, okay, so this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to shade here and here. So I'm going to take the dark color. The other side of the brush is water. So if I press it on my piece of paper, you can see what's going to happen. One side is water, the other side is color. And it just kind of fades to nothing. So I'm going to tuck the dark color up underneath this lemon. I'm going to press it down hard. I'm going to pull it down and lift up. Now you can't really see it on this paper, okay, but you're going to be able to see it now when I do it on here. I'm going to bring it up closer to the camera, pull through. Okay, water on this side is water, this side is color. And folks, I like to keep my darkest color, whatever brush I'm using, to the left of side of the brush. And if I'm right-handed, it's going to be to my thumb side. If it's my left, if I'm left-handed, it'll be to my hand side. And by doing that, I know where the dark color is no matter what I'm painting. By keeping the dark to the left side of the brush, even if you have 5 colors on your brush, keep the darkest color to the left side. Now I'm going to tuck, I'm going to come up, I'm going to press hard. I'm going to tuck in, cut it underneath, pull it up, and then come down the side and come off. So it's down here. I don't have to reload. It's got plenty of color. Underneath this lemon, okay, I know where the left side is. There's my dark color. I push it in next to the lemon. I slide it up, lift up, turn it a little bit, press down. And let it taper off. Okay, now I'm not going to wash. I'm going to go into the water. I'm going to go to the paper towel and let it suck up. And I see where my dark color is to the left of the writing. Now you can see why I like to keep it. I'm going to go into the color. I'm going to blend it. If you're using the palette sheet, there's a watercolor blending square. And I'm going to come along here, press it down, pull it along, and shade it. Now, on these upper ones, they're not in a shadow, but if you wanted to add a little more dark color, you could come along the edge. if you wanted to make them a little greener, a little deeper. And you can come over here. I'm adding some additional color. Now, when it dries, okay, when it dries, it'll lighten up and you'll get rid of that heavy look. You'll see how it fades out. And I forgot this guy right here. And we're going to tuck it in and bring it up. Okay, this is not in your notes, but I'd like to show it to you to add a little bit more interest. Now, you don't have to do this, but if you want to watch me, I'm going to do a turn back or a turn over on a couple of these leaves. Okay, so I'm going to do that. I'm going to take a pencil. I'm going to put a little turnover right here. I'm going to cut in. I don't know. I'm going to put it up closer to the camera so you can see. I took a pencil line right in here very lightly here. And I think I'll do one right up here. Just to give you a little something. You don't have to do this, folks. Okay, so remember the loading that I talked about. Load in water, suck up the water onto the paper towel, and then pull your brush through the mix at the top and press it out. Now, this little double line now that is in there, it's the back side of the leaf. This piece here is the back side of the leaf. And the back side of leaves are usually lighter in most cases. So I'm going to take my brush. I'm going to come inward. I'm going to lay the color on the pencil line that I sketched in, and I'm going to press it down hard. I'm going to come in and around, and I'm going to add the shading. So you still have your leaf over here, okay? Now, we're gonna go ahead and add some detailing with our liner. You have the 10-aught liner or one liner or something, okay? Now, when you load a liner, this is the tricky part. You've got to fully load and then unload. So what I'm saying is, here's my dark color here. Now, with a liner, you might want to have a little bit of extra water in it. So, because if it's too thick, it won't fall off the brush. Okay, so I take my palette knife. I don't use the brush, I use the palette knife. I add a drop or two of water. And I pull through. What do I mean by I pull through? I go, here's my liner. I go into my color. I pull through, I pull through, I pull through, I pull through, I pull through. Now my brush is really, really, really loaded. That's way too loaded. So what I mean by offloading, you come over here to a clean area of your palette or your tile or whatever you're using, and you take the color off. Okay. You can spot my style from a mile away because I have a tendency when detailing to like to use a broken, hit and miss, helter-skelter line. So I hold my line. Now you got to hold your liner straight up, and you're gonna come along the edge, and you're gonna let the liner do the work. Now, put your tail in. put your tail in. Some of the line is thick, some of the line is thin. You can have a little gap. Now come down the middle with this dark green and lift up as you come. Don't go all the way to the end. It looks a little softer by just, if you think you're light, just do it a second time. Lift up as you get to the end, and then pull off a few little side veins. And on the lemon, you can have it. You don't have to do it on both sides of all of them, sometimes 3 lines. Okay, now we're going to go up here. You just pull it down, lift up as you do the center. Notice I use my little finger. That takes a little while to get used to, but it's a pivot for me. Now the pigment is strong, so 1 coat will be sufficient for this kind of detailing if you're using a dark color. Now, if I was using a lighter color, I'd have to go over it a couple of times because the pigment's not going to be as strong. But in this green, it's very, very dark. And now remember the turn back. I'm going to come along this edge. And now you can see it. How are we doing, guys? I hope you're enjoying yourself and learning. So with fundamentals, 1 color covers another. They're opaque. You can use them with brushwork. They can go on greenware or bisque. They also can go to cone 5 and 6. However, you need to check the paperwork because they do have some color change. Some don't change at all at cone 5 and 6, and some do. The ones that really don't change are the blues and the browns and the reds. It's amazing how the reds do so nice. And we pull down. Now, I find doing this kind of detail work for me is very relaxing. And the more you do, the better you become at it. And it's spelled backwards, but it's fundamentals. And it says UG, and that means under glaze. UG is under glaze. And that's the same. Mako originally used to call their underglazes underglaze to fundamentals when they reformulated. So it's opaque coverage, but you can use 1, 2, and 3 coats depending on how intense or opaque you want. So what do I mean by that? Well, I could have painted this whole plate black, and then I would have to put my leaves on and everything with it, definitely 3 coats, and then you come back and do the shading, and the opaque color would cover the black. Whereas with stroke and coats, you would still see some black coming through. Now you don't want to mix them though with stroke and coat. Like, oh, like somebody asked if they could use stroke and coat with these, and I would rather not see that happen. Unless you fired it in between. Then that's a different story. So you may want to do your leaves with smooth outlining. I have a tendency to like a broken outline. However, I will do smooth outlining on occasion, depending on the look that I want. Now, one of the other reasons I like a little bit of yellow in my leaf is because my design is yellow. So let's say we're not going to do purple plums in today, but if I were doing purple plums, I would put a little bit of purple in my leaf. It's an old China paint trick that you bring in some of the flower or main lemon, plum, strawberry. You bring a little of that color that they are into the leaf, and it just makes it all work really well together. And the reason I'm not worrying about my stems is where I'm going to put a background on here and then the stems. Okay, and that's also going to show you some more opacity. So now I've got my 2 lemons on, and they are dry. And that's why I did my leaves in that order. I wanted to get these 2 lemons dry. Okay, so you've got bright yellow, you've got orange sorbet and yellow and squash yellow, and you've got some white on your palette. Okay, I'm going to use all those colors on the lemons. Oh, and some apple green. Okay, so we're going to start with this lemon number 1 down here at the bottom. Now, again, looking at my sheet, you can see that I've got some shadow in here underneath lemon number 3. Okay, so this is lemon number 1, lemon number 2, lemon number 3, even though it's not right on your pattern. Okay, so if you'll adjust your pattern, that'll be great. Now we're not going to brush it. We're going to stipple. And the reason we're going to stipple is because to show you the property of that underglazes can stay ridged, and I want the look of the lemon to be kind of like when you buy a lemon or use a lemon, it has kind of a rougher type peel. Had a brain thing there. I couldn't remember. I wanted to say skin. That's not right. Okay, so I'm going to go to my yellow, my bright yellow. I got rid of the water, and now I'm going to load up. And I'm not really worrying about having it brush back to a point. You can see that's pretty loaded. Okay, I'm going to take my brush, and I'm going to start stippling straight up and down. Now, if I get a little bit on the leaf, it's okay. We can add more. I'm going to stipple in up and down, straight up and down. Tuck it in. And you want to see texture. Now you're going to cover the whole thing, and it could be fairly heavy. Now, can you put on too much? Yes. If it's on too heavy and not been thinned, it can pull. So you want to make sure that you get the texture, but you don't like slather it on. Okay. And I'm going back a little bit more. The 6 round is, and if you had a 4 will work. I think a lot of times when it comes to brush stroke, the size of the brush, unless you're doing real big stuff, doesn't really matter. Okay, can you see the texture? Yeah. See how it's ridged here? I want that. So we go up to this lemon over here. And the more textured you get it, you can go back. But that texture will show up even after the clear glaze is applied. And we'll talk about firing this before the end of the session. Okay. So we need to let that set just a little bit. So now would be a good time if anybody has any questions about the product. Or now the reason I use the page protector palette is because very often we don't remember all the names. And so I find it really good to have this, and I do this for all of my classes. So now what I want to do is I want to go down to squash yellow. So I'm going to pick up a little bright yellow on my tip of my brush. A little bit of, okay, and I'm going to go into squash yellow, which is down at the bottom of your palette. I'm going to pat it a little bit. Now I'm going to add the shading, and I'm going to stipple that. Now it's very similar in color. There we go. Stipple it and lay the brush a little flat as you stipple, because I've got yellow and then orange-ish. So if you lay it flat, then the yellow goes down over the lemon. Okay, now it's going to be hard for you to see on camera, but the next step will be a little easier. And you come in. All right, so I've added that shading there. And it's gonna be really hard to see, but hang with me, guys. Okay, and now I need to shade under this leaf and under this lemon. So I load, tip, and I'm going to start. And it's just, you'll see a little bit of darkness. I think you can see it this time. Yeah, as it dries, you're seeing it here a little bit. And then you're here. All right, so I'm using a patting motion. This is a great project to teach somebody who wants to start doing some decorative painting, and they're going to get good results right off the bat. All right, so lemons have a little bit of green in them, depending on how ripe they are. So again, not washing my brush, I'm going into the bright yellow. I'm going to tip with apple green. And I'm going to the opposite side here. I'm going to stipple in a little bit of green along the edge. And if you wanted to make it a little stronger, you could go up to a little tiny bit of leaf green, but you got to be careful here. Just soften that down by patting against it. Be careful on that leaf. The apple should be fine, but so you can see what I'm doing. And over here, here. You just barely see it, but it's there. Okay, so now we've had a little bit of drying time. And what do I consider dry? If I can touch it without it coming off on my finger, it's ready to go. It's ready to go. If I can touch it without it coming off on my finger, it's ready to go. If all of a sudden the color comes off on my finger, then you might want to let it dry. Okay, now I'm going to go to orange sorbet. Tip it. And I'm going to come under here now and I'm going to darken it again. Again, laying it a little bit on the flat. And now this one you're going to be able to see. And we're just adding a shadow. Orange sorbet, tuck it up underneath the leaf that's overlapping the lemon. So I am shading the lemon. Therefore, my brush is on the lemon. When you're shading, the brush is always on the noun, meaning the noun is the lemon. Okay, if I was shading the leaf, then the brush would be on the leaf. When I came over here and did this turn back, my brush was on the leaf. Okay. People have trouble. All right, now you can see how that orange is right there. It's going to fire nicely. I'm going to go plain yellow, and I'm going to stipple the side that I did not put any green on. I'm going to add a little bit more yellow to the edge. And your lemons come in all shapes and sizes, folks. So if they're not perfectly rounded or they, you know, but make sure you get this little dimple or this little rounded bottom in there. That's kind of important. All right. So I've got shading. I've got a little green in my lemon. I got a little yellow in my leaves, so they're working kind of together. But I want my lemon to look really rounded. And when something is rounded, it's lighter, closer to you. So I'm going to pick up, I'm going to have my yellow, pick up my yellow, and I'm going to go into China white. Just a little bit. And on this side of the lemon, you're going to stipple in some white with the yellow in it. It's like a little highlight of white. And on this one, I don't want it to be too strong, but I do want to have so you can see a little tiny bit of white. And that's going to make it look like it's rounded out. It's lighter, it's closer to you. Now, if you were doing this in Stroke and Coat, you could do it exactly the same way. With the stippling, with the colors, it'll work. And if you were doing it in acrylics, exactly the same way. All right, so now as this dries, you can see the shading here. You can see a little bit of green here. in here. On this side, it could be a little bit more green. I'll go back and put a little bit more of the apple right in here. All right. So these two guys, except for the detailing, are done. So now, number 3. The reason I did just these two first is that number 3 is on top of both of those. So I wanted to get the shading in. And a lot of times people will paint all the lemons with a base coat of yellow, and then they can't see this division line. So I like to do it in steps. Then I'm going to go to my, now the first thing I did, if you recall, I put one coat smoothly on the whole lemon. Cut it in. So this is going to take a minute to dry. So I'm going to talk to you about firing. Let me get this coat on. These like to be fired before glazing. And to get the true intensity of their color, the deepness, they should be fired to 04. And of course, if you're doing greenware, you would fire it to 04. Now, I'm not talking about cone 6 firing. I'm talking about regular, traditional, low fire ceramic ware. So I would fire this to an 04. And let's say I had color on the bottom. Let's say I painted this a bright yellow on the bottom. I would not have to stilt it. There's no frit in here, so it can sit directly on the shelf. So you're going to fire it back to 04, and then when you go to glaze it, you're going to stilt it and fire it to cone 06. Okay, so when this will come out of the kiln, it will still be flat. It will not have any sheen to it whatsoever. Okay, you're just painting with a colored pigment that needs 3 coats for opaque coverage. Okay, now if you only take it to cone, if you set it at 06, it will still work. However, it won't be as intense. The yellow will be a little not quite so deep. So I like to suggest, I'm sure the company does too, that you fire this back to 04, even if it's on a piece of bisque. And I'm using nothing but bisque anymore. It's hard to get greenware out here in California. So I'm using this as if this plate was a piece of greenware, and considering it as that. So I'm going to fire it in the kiln at cone 04. And then when it comes out, I'm going to glaze it with the clear glaze. Okay, all right, with the crystal clear. I'm rinsing. Okay, so now I've got that coat on. I'm going to come back now, and I'm going to stipple on a coat. Tucking it right up. Being careful to stay off of the lower lemon that's completed. I'm just kind of sliding it around and stippling it on. Now, if this was an apple, I wouldn't stipple it. I would brush it on like I did the leaves. You can see as it dries the texture. All right. So that has to dry a little tiny bit. So while that's drying, I want to show you the background a little bit. Okay. So this is like a China paint technique, old-fashioned technique. So I'm going to go into my color. I've got my palette knife out. And I really do like using a palette knife to get the color out. Then you're not pouring and getting it. I need a little bit of sea blue. Now, Maria, I know you don't have sea blue, but that's all right. You can do this without sea blue. Not a problem. Put the lid back on. Oh, also, with all of my colors, I always put the number on the top of the lid so it will match when I go to put it on. So I'm not putting a baby blue lid on a sea blue bottle. I don't want to contaminate. Shake your color. It's very smooth and homogenized, but I will show you when we get to the browns what you have to do with the browns. A little bit of baby blue. Try not to paint out of the bottle because there's a possibility that the brush could contaminate your paint. Happens on occasion. So, okay, and then I want okay, so I got my little orchid color here. And it's a little jelly, so I just take my palette knife and kind of mix it up. Okay, and then I have Regal Purple, which is I do worry about these little pieces sometimes you get on the edge of the jar. That just comes with the territory. I just lift it off. And a little bit of Regal Purple. Now, their colors are close to what they are in the jar, but they're little, you know, some are darker, some are lighter. You just have to realize that they're going to change in the firing. Okay. Haven't put on my stems and I have not finished this lemon. I'm letting this lemon dry a little bit. In fact, it's still a little wet. So I'm going to show you this, how I like to do the background. Okay. Even though my water is dirty, it's not that dirty. All the pigment is fallen to the bottom of the bottle, so I'm not going to change my water. Okay, I'm going to be okay, unless it's absolutely black. Okay, so I'm going to dip my brush in the water. I'm going to get another piece of paper towel. All right, and I want to keep the water in the brush. And normally I would tell you, hold your brush straight up in most cases, you know, that's how. This time I want you to hold, somebody's trying to get in. I kind of like to say, hold it like a kid, but hold a toothbrush. So the brush is flat. So it's like this. So I'm going to go into my water. Can't see that, can you? Okay, I'm going to go into my water. I'm going to go to my paper towel. Let the water suck up a little bit. Okay, and I'm going to start down here. I'm going to direct the point of the brush is going to be, I'm going to do it with no color right now. It's going to be directed right at the leaf, and I'm going to lay the brush flat. Okay, so if I put color, I'm going to use the blue, maybe the sea blue, and maybe a little bit of baby blue. Now, just watch me. Okay, I'm going to lay it down, and I'm going to float it. You can see how the color, tuck it in. Okay. So then, and I'm going to come back in here and I'm going to lay it down. And the point is on what's painted. And all I'm doing is putting a shadow. Water, color. You can do it and press hard. Now we can come back and touch up the outlining a little bit. Now, purple and yellow are complementary colors. That's why I'm doing it this way. So now I'm going to go into my 2 shades of the regal purple and the wild violet, tip it, and I'm going to blend it over the next into the blue, and I'm going to shade up underneath. And bring it down. Point of the brush. See how the point and the brush is just flat? And I'm kind of shaking a little bit intentionally. I'm just kind of wiggling the brush. Now I might come back here and go back to my blue. Don't wash the brush. Water, color. I went back to the 2 blues. I'm going to overlap the purple a little bit, and then I'm going to put a little bit of the blues in there. And you're just going to continue around. Tuck it in, and then come back and smear it if you need to. You want to make sure it goes from dark to water. I am very partial to the purple on this design. Like that. So I'm going to show you, and I'll go back and finish this. but I want to show you what it does. It gives you this shadowed area here. And it just kind of, to me, lifts the design off of the white plate. Now, notice I'm going right over my stem because it's hard to cut around the stem. So we're going to paint right on top of the background to do your stem. Now, I didn't wash my brush and I went into the blue. Now, if it gets too strong, right here, I think it's a little bit strong. I'm just going to take water and just lay the brush flat, and I'm pressing it down, and the water is softening the edge. And we're doing this now because we want the middle lemon to dry. And of course, like Sandy with its 35 below, it might take longer for the color to dry. In Manitoba. That's what's nice about Zoom, that we get to see people and work with people from all over the world. I do some Zoom classes on my own, and we have folks from the Netherlands, and Australia is a little hard, only because of the time frame. Okay. So how are we doing, folks? Are we understanding this design or what I'm doing, the shadowing? I'm assuming no answer is yes. Take a little water, soften it again. Well, this is blue. Okay. There you go. I mean, you kind of use a color wheel sometimes to come up with different ideas. A lot of times, China painter might use 5 or 6 washy colors, like sunlight coming through the leaves and all kinds of things like that. Okay, so we got to go back to this puppy dog. So we're going to go back to the middle lemon. Okay, we need to get some color in there. Now, the shadow is right here. It's underneath this leaf and down this side, okay? So again, using my little guide that you guys have, you can see I've put it here and here. The leaf is on top. The leaf is on top, so we are shading the lemon and the brush is on the lemon. Okay, so load up with your yellow and you're going to tip with the squash yellow, right? And you're going to, under here, you're going to pat in the squash yellow. Sorry. And you're going to bring it down this side. Okay, right in through there. Like that. Okay, so that's got to dry. So let's keep this side more yellow. So give it another coat of yellow, stippled. So this is going to ensure more texture. And towards the bottom, let's add the green. And this has a little bit of yellow right over here. And that's drying. The way that's drying, this is how I have to teach when you have a large group and you have to bounce around, even though your instructions say do this and then, but to ensure good drying time, I'm going to go and I want to talk to you about the browns. We have two browns, 57, and we have, okay, and we have chocolate. So I want to show you, there's nothing wrong with this brown. However, because it's a brown, and the chemicals that are used to make browns, they have a tendency to thicken. So I go into my bottle and I really mix it. Now this is a brand new bottle, a fairly new bottle, so you can see, but I just keep mixing it and mixing it and mixing it, and it'll thin down a little bit. And I've already done that with the chocolate brown, but I wanted to show you. Okay, now see how much smoother that is now? Okay, so I don't need a lot, folks. I don't need a lot. And I'm putting the spice brown, but you can see it's still kind of almost like gummy. That's the wrong word, but it's rather thick. So we take a little water. I'm not worrying about dirty water because the pigment's going to take over. And now I add a little bit of water to that to get it a nice brushing consistency. You can see how the palette knife mixes it in. I want a little bit more because I think I added a little tiny bit too much water. If you have a pipette, that works well for adding more water. Okay, clean that off. Again, I don't like to use, out of the lid or out of the jar. I like to put it on a palette. Okay. All right. So we're going to go back to our little trusty little liner. Okay. And I want to, while this lemon's drying, I want to pull in the stem. So I'm going to just take one coat of the spice brown first. And I'm holding the liner straight up, and I'm just going to paint in one coat and brush it out. Make sure it's a little jiggly. And cut right in over the background. Okay, you pull in. Please remind me if I go off camera because I forget. I have a tendency when I paint to pull it into my chest. This is one coat, which would not be enough to cover that purple or that blue. And then I have the stem coming down and pulling it off. Okay, see how I kind of jiggle? All right, now I got that on. Let that set a second. Because remember, wet on wet will pull off what you've already got on there. Okay. Now, I'm going to go back to my spice brown, and I'm going to pull my liner through my chocolate. Now my chocolate I have had out for a little tiny bit since we started. So we have it warm in the house today. So we're going to add a little bit of, because it will thicken. And those of you who live in warm climates, my Arizona people and my Nevada people, those really dry climates, you will have to, while you're painting, every once in a while, thin your color down again. It just is the nature of the beastie. Okay, so you're going to load up, and now I'm going to pull through and get the chocolate into my brush, and I'm going to start to kind of shade down your stem. Again, kind of shake it. You can make it stronger by adding more chocolate on one side, and then a little bit of the, and let the colors come off the brush and blend. It's a piece of wood. Wood comes in all colors. And just because I did it this way doesn't mean it's the best way. It's the way I did it. And when you take classes, take what you like from each teacher and use it, and you come up with your own style. So you can see if I had put the background on after the stem, I would have smeared the stem. So it's easier to paint right over. Okay. I can come back with a little tiny bit of black. And I can accent the edge of the stem with a little tiny bit of black. Don't let it overpower. Just put a little bit of, just a little bit. There we go. Our lemon's dry. I can touch it. Rinse. Get rid of the water. Okay, the reason I say get rid of the water is just a good habit to get into, because you don't want to reload it with water and then have the brush go all over your piece. And, it'll, okay. Now we go to a little yellow and some orange sorbet, and we shade underneath that leaf and down this leaf. Some of you may get it darker than others, but that's okay. All right. Now I said we come down yellow to the outer edge, blending it in, but pouncing it. And then a little green along this edge. You just barely see it. and then yellow on this side. So what did I forget? I did. I forgot something. Now, we not really forgot it, but don't forget to put the white in the middle, right into here. I'm blending it with the yellow. Now, I can see the white on my dried lemons. I'm hoping you can see a little bit of a white highlight right in through here on yours. And notice how, all right, okay. We're getting there. So now I got to do a little touching up, a little tiny bit of touching up with my liner work, and we're going to do some liner work around the lemons, okay? So the first thing I'm going to do is look at my green, and I'm going to go back to my forest green, and we're going to clean up where maybe the yellow got on the green. Just a little bit there. This just kind of cleans it up a little bit. That worked out pretty well. Did any back, and then if the background got on, I don't think the background is going to hurt your leaves because the leaves are so strong. But you can also just add a little bit more. If you want to enhance your tail to your leaf, you can come in here and just make a little bit more of a point. There you go, like that. Like I said, you can spot my style. Everybody has a different style. Okay. Now my lemons are light, very, very, very lightly. My lemons are very lightly accented with a little bit of broken line, and I added some dots. That's just, again, just to make that textured look. And you know, if you, I don't know if you can actually see it, but if you can feel it, when you get done and after it's glazed, you run your hand, you'll feel a slight little texture to that lemon because of the fundamentals being not a frit-based product. Okay, so now I'm going to shape. I'm going to go into my chocolate, and I'm going to load my liner and get rid of most of the color off the liner. Excuse me. Okay, so I'm going to come in here. I'm going to put a little tiny broken line, shaping my lemon, getting the nib on there. Now, this is not going to be as strong as a one stroke or easy stroke. The fundamental, because of its properties, it'll be a little softer with one coat. It won't be as strong as like a French brown or something like that. You just have to be aware that it's going to be softer than you imagined. I'll come down along here and we'll come up here. You can see it's just a little bit of detailing. I don't want to outline it completely, because then it looks like a coloring book, and we're not doing a coloring book. Remember, art is an illusion. And I'm very traditional in my painting. If I want a rose to look like a rose or lemon to look like, I like to make it realistic. That's just how I learned. But that doesn't mean that somebody who does kind of modern looking pieces, that doesn't mean that they don't know how to paint. Okay, so then take the tip of my brush, holding it straight up. I'm going to add a few little tiny dots. Make sure they're not in a straight line. Little tiny dots. Notice they're not all the same size. And I want that. I want them to be a little different. Just a few little dots. And then, folks, with the brown or the dark green or whatever, or the black, very small, sign your name. And you need to practice this because when you're first starting out getting small, sometimes they practice writing your name small. But I think it's a piece of art, so you should sign the front. A lot of people don't, and I know a lot of people, which is great, like to put a little bit of a design on the back side of the plate. In class, I don't do that because of time constraints, but later on, I got my paint out here. If I wanted to put a little something on the back, that would be great. Got one more thing to show you on this project. So while I'm getting set up for the next part, does anybody have any questions? Now, there's a lot of ways you can finish it off. You can sponge a border on, but I wanted to show you just how I use a foam brush. So I have a banding wheel, and you actually don't need a banding wheel. It just makes it a little easier for this. So I'm going to put it so you can see, and I want to make sure that you can see the foam brush, okay? All right, so what's a foam brush? Well, you get them, they're really cheap. You get them at the hardware store, and that's for painting. But I don't know if you're all aware of it, but there's a hard piece of plastic in the middle right here. And I use that piece of plastic as a means of getting the color on where I want it. So I'm going to take Regal Purple, and I need to thin it down. So you notice I cleared off the bottom of my palette. So I'm going to get rid of the brown that's in my palette knife. I'm going to scoop up so I don't wait. Now look at all the color I have left. And I hardly put any out. So you can see the paint goes a long ways. So those of you who teach, let's say you wanted to teach this project. I would say you could get easily, using one bottle, you could easily teach this and have enough paint for 15 students easily. So you can see where the color goes a long ways. I think, okay, this is where I'm coming from. All right, we have to understand that I've come from the old world school. I've been doing this I've been teaching ceramics since I was 18 and I'm 75. So when I started, we had one stroke or easy strokes. underglazes or cover coats and glazes. So, and then things like stroke and coat and concepts came later on. Okay, so underglazes were designed, fundamentals originally, cover coats originally, were all designed to be applied to greenware. And so, and they didn't move. So somebody were to come into my studio in the old days and say, I want my little figurine to be shiny and in color. So I would direct them to underglazes, because if I directed them towards a glaze product, there's a possibility of the glaze product slightly running during firing. And originally in those days, it was all leaded glaze, so it flowed more. So underglazes were used for painting like this, specific design without movement. Okay. So the advantage of it is that what you see right here, when I glaze it, you're going to get exactly this look. Okay. Now, if I had done this in stroke and coat, it would probably fire with a little bit of movement and maybe not be so sharp on the edges. Like it's going to flatten, it's going to flow because there's glass in it, there's frit in it. So it just depends on the look you want. Now, contemporary studios, it's difficult for you guys to have two kinds of underglaze paint. Stroke and coat will do this. Okay, we'll do this project perfectly. However, if you're comfortable with fundamentals, the fundamentals, in my opinion, will fire a tiny bit sharper. What you see is what you get without movement. Does that help? Does that explain? Okay, so and a fundamental or an old underglaze, what Mako used to call it, and then Duncan's cover coat, basically it was designed for greenware. And then when the bisque market came about, the companies needed to create a product that could go on bisque and not and work without having it to be fired in between. Whereas if they were doing it in underglazes or fundamentals or cover coat, it would need to be fired with an extra step. So that's why you have the advent of the stroke and coat and the concept idea. So to get it to work on bisque, they made a product that has frit and not clay-based. Now, my understanding is that their manufacturers are changing their formulation a little bit so that the fundamental can be used on bisque without having a problem. Okay, so it just depends on what you like to do. Okay, fundamentals and underglazes were originally designed for greenware, because this whole idea of bisqueware wasn't around 50 years ago. It was you painted on greenware. Now, I've painted this plate on bisque. This is a Mako bisque plate. So I've painted it on the bisque, but I will fire it without glazing it to 04, and then I will clear glaze it. If I did it in the stroke and coat, I could let it dry thoroughly and either dip it or brush on glaze, and then fire it all at once at 06. But that's with stroke and coat. And this is where it gets a little confusing, because they're both they're talked about being kind of like an underglaze, but the true underglaze has no frit. Okay, that's why they call this UG fundamentals. Okay. Okay, so I want to talk about foam brush real quick. I put out some Regal Purple and I thinned it down with a drop of water. And this time I want clean water, so I'm dipping in my water glass. And now I've got my foam brush. Oh, let's see, I don't want to squirt. Okay, I have my foam brush. I pinch the water out, but I want to make sure that there's still some water in there. Okay. Okay. Now, I put this on a banding wheel just to make it a little easier to do. I center it. It doesn't have for this. It's not like putting a band in here. So it's just an eye center. I just take my, and it's a little off. All right. I dip my foam brush into the slightly thinned Regal Purple, pat it off. All right, now I know I've got that piece of plastic right in the middle here. Okay, so I'm going to take my brush, and I'm not going to do a lot of pressure. I'm going to lay it on its side, and I'm going to turn it on the banding wheel. Now it's going to give me a perfectly smooth edge. I'm going to let it dry. I'm going to do it one more time, and then I'm going to hold the edge up so you can see what it did. It takes just a second to let it dry. So, folks, that's about all I've got for you guys with this project. I hope you've had as much fun watching and doing it as I've had teaching it.